we'll be understanding the theoretical approaches or orientations within psychology. Psychology encompasses a rich tapestry of theoretical approaches that offer diverse perspectives on understanding human behavior and mental processes. Here are key theoretical orientations within psychology. So before understanding them, let us understand what is a perspective. A perspective refers to a particular theoretical framework or approaches that involve certain assumptions about human behavior, the way they function, which aspects are worthy of study, and what research methods are appropriate for undertaking the study. There may be several theories within an approach, but they all share these assumptions. The most important psychological perspectives are psychodynamic, humanistic, biological, cognitive, behavioral. So each approach has its strengths and weaknesses and brings something different to our understanding of human behavior. For this reason, it's important that psychology does have different perspectives on understanding and study of human and animal behavior. So the first perspective which we are going to understand is the psychodynamic perspective. The key figures in psychodynamic perspective were Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Alfred Adler. The focus or the emphasis, it emphasizes the influence of unconscious processes, early childhood experiences, and the dynamic interplay of conflicting forces on behavior. Psychoanalysis is a therapeutic application of this perspective. So, very famous. Who hasn't heard of Sigmund Freud? So many expressions of our daily life come from Freud's theory of psychoanalysis. The subconscious, denial, repression, the personality, to name only a few. He believed that events in our childhood can have a significant impact on our behavior as adults. He also believed that people have little free will to make choices in life. Instead, our behavior is determined by the unconscious mind and childhood experiences. Freud's psychoanalysis is both a theory and therapy. It is original psychodynamic theory and inspired psychologists such as Jung and Erikson to develop their own psychodynamic theories. Freud's work is vast and he has contributed greatly to psychology as a discipline. Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, explained the human mind as like an iceberg with only a small amount of it being visible, the outside. That is our observable behavior. But what about the one which is submerged in water? It is the unconscious, the submerged mind that has the most underlying influence on our behavior. Freud used three main methods of assessing the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind, the free association, dream analysis, and slips of the tongue, Freudian tongue. He believed that the unconscious mind consists of three components, the id, ego, and the superego, the forces, the conflicting forces. He gave the concept of the intra-psychic forces. He spoke about libido, the eros, the thanatos, that is a death instinct, libido, that is the energy force, the id and the superego, the defense mechanisms. He gave the psychosexual development theory, Oedipus complex and the Electra complex. Nevertheless, psychoanalysis has been greatly contributory to psychology in that it has encouraged many modern theorists to modify it for the better using its basic principles but eliminating its major flaws. So moving on from psychodynamic to the behavioral perspective. The behavioral perspective comes from the behavioral, behaviorism as a school of thought. It is different from most of the approaches because they view people as controlled by their environment, and specifically that we are the result of what we have learned from our environment. The behaviorist perspective is concerned with how environmental factors, the S, stimuli, affect observable behavior, that is the R, response, how stimuli affects the response. The behaviorist perspective proposes two main processes wherein people learn from the environment, namely classical conditioning and operant or instrumental conditioning. The key figures in behavioral perspective, John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner. The focus is to concentrate on the observable behaviors. The behaviorist emphasizes learning through conditioning, reinforcement, and the impact of external environment on behavior. The classical conditioning was studied by the Russian psychologist Ivan Pavlov. Though looking into natural reflexes and neutral stimuli, he managed to condition dogs to salivate the sound of a bell through repeated association with the sound of the bell and the food. Accidentally, he was trying to understand digestion, but accidentally he came across conditioning. The principles of classical conditioning have been applied in many therapies. These include systematic desensitization for phobias, step-by-step exposed to a fear stimulus at once, and aversion therapy. B.F. Skinner investigated operant conditioning of voluntary and involuntary behavior. Skinner felt that some behavior could be explained by the person's motive. Behaviorism also focuses in scientific methodology, controlled experiments. Behaviorism rejects the idea that people have free will and believe that environment determines all behavior. So S and R, learned relationship. Behaviorism has been criticized in the way it underestimates the complexities of human behavior. Many studies used animals which are hard to generalize to humans, and it cannot explain, for example, the speed in which we pick up language. There must be a biological factor involved in it. Moving on to the cognitive perspective. The key figures is Jean Piaget, Nasser, Aaron Beck. The whole focus is to investigate mental processes like thinking, memory, perception, giving meaning to something, and problem solving. This approach explores how individuals process information, make decisions, and construct their understanding of the world. The cognitive psychology revolves around the notion that if you want to know what makes people tick, then the way to do it is to figure out what processes are actually going on in their minds. In other words, psychologists from this perspective study cognition, which is the mental act or processes by which knowledge is acquired. The cognitive perspective is concerned with the mental functions or mental processes such as memory, perception, attention, etc. It views people as being similar to computers in the way we process information, input, process, output. For example, both human brains and computers process information, store data, and have input or output procedures. So we encode, we store, and then we retrieve the data. This has led cognitive psychologists to explain that memory comprises of three stages: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Encoding, where information is received and attended to; storage, where the information is retained; and retrieval, where the information is recalled. It is extremely scientific approach and typically uses lab experiments to study human behavior. The cognitive approach has many applications, including cognitive therapy and eyewitness testimony. Moving on to the humanistic perspective. The key figures were Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. The whole focus is to understand the significance of personal growth. Self-actualization. Who is a self-actualized person? Fully functioning person and the inherent goodness in individuals. Humanists believe that people strive towards fulfilling their potential and improving themselves, understanding free will, giving their 100% full potential to something. Moving on to biological perspective. The key figures, James Olds and Roger Sperry. The focus was to examine the biological basis of behavior, emphasizing the role of brain, nervous system, and genetics. Investigates how physiological processes influence psychological functioning. The biological perspective states that all thought, feeling, and behavior ultimately have a biological cause. It is one of the major perspectives in psychology and involves such things as studying the brain, genetics, hormones, and the immune and nervous system. Theorists in biological perspective who study behavioral genomics consider how genes affect behavior. Now that the human genome is mapped, perhaps we will someday understand more precisely how behavior is affected by the DNA we inherit. Biological factors such as chromosomes, hormones, and brain all have a significant influence on human behavior, for example, gender. The biological approach believes that most behavior is inherited, has an adaptive or evolutionary function. For example, in the weeks immediately after the birth of a child, levels of testosterone in father drops by more than 30%. This has an evolutionary function. Testosterone deprived men are less likely to wander off in search of new mates to inseminate. They are also less aggressive, which is used when there is a baby around. Biological psychologists explain behavior in neurological terms, the physiology and the structure of brain and how this influences behavior. Many biological psychologists have concentrated on abnormal behavior and have tried to explain it. For example, the biological psychologists believe that schizophrenia is affected by levels of dopamine, a neurotransmitter. These findings have helped psychiatry take off and help relieve the symptoms of mental illness through drugs. However, Freud and other disciplines would argue that this just treats the symptoms and not the cause. This is where health psychologists take the finding that biological psychologists produce and look at the environmental factors that are involved to get a better picture of everything. Evolutionary perspective. The key figures, Charles Darwin, survival of the fittest, David Buss. A central claim of evolutionary psychology is that the brain, and therefore the mind, evolved to solve problems encountered by our hunter-gatherer ancestors during the upper period of over 10,000 years ago. The evolutionary approach explains behavior in terms of selective pressures that shape behavior. Most behaviors that we see display are believed to have developed during our EEA, that is environment of evolutionary adaptation, to help us survive. Observed behavior is likely to have developed because of it is adaptive. It has been naturally selected. Individuals who are best adapted to survive and reproduce. Behaviors may even be sexually selected. Individuals who are more successful in gaining access to mates leave behind more offsprings. The mind is therefore equipped with instincts that enable our ancestors to survive and reproduce. The strength of this approach is that it can explain behavior that appear dysfunctional, such as anorexia, an eating disorder, or behaviors that make little sense in a modern context, such as biological stress response. It focuses on the influence of culture, society, and in social interactions on behavior and mental processes. This approach recognizes that individuals are shaped by their cultural context. Socio-cultural perspective. The key figures, Vygotsky, Harris, Triantis. The whole focus is on understanding the society and the culture, how they work together. It examines the influence of culture, society, social interaction, social norms, roles on behavior and mental process of humans. This approach recognizes that individuals are shaped by their cultural context, that we are the product of our culture. Existential and phenomenological perspectives. Key figures: Viktor Frankl, Rollo May. The whole focus is to explore the subjective and personal aspects of human experience, emphasizing individual choice, responsibility, and the search for meaning in life. There's a book written by Viktor Frankl, The Meaning in Life. Eclectic or integrated approach. Now, this approach combines elements from multiple perspectives. The whole rationale is to acknowledge that no single perspective can comprehensively explain all aspects of human behavior. So it needs to be integrated. Integrative approaches seek a more holistic understanding by drawing on insights from various theories. These theoretical approaches contribute to the richness and diversity of psychology, allowing researchers and practitioners to explore different facets of complex interplay between the mind, behavior, and the broader context in which individuals exist. Thank you.